Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. On this, the penultimate day of February. I'm Hugh, February 27th in the year of our Lord, 2023. Studio West, where it's not raining for the first time in like 3 weeks in California. This has not been the California that we lived in from 1989 to 2015. Been a different California this past couple of months. And I'll tell you about that in the course of the show. First, the news of the weekend, and there was a lot of it. Lab leak. Most likely origin of COVID-19 pandemic, the United States Department of Energy says. That's the Wall Street Journal headline. The New York Times headline, lab leak most likely caused pandemic, Energy Department says. Remember, the Energy Department runs our national laboratories, 3 of them, and they know of which they speak when it comes to big picture science items. And they're not politicized in the same way that CDC is. It's really a hard-working agency run usually by among the best in the business on both parties, and they are very serious about this lab leak, and I'll be talking with former Secretary of State about this later in the day. Mike Pompeo will join me. Chairman Ronna McDaniel on CNN's State of the Union with Dana Bash yesterday. Dana asked her, what about Donald Trump on Hugh Hewitt talking about not supporting the nominee if it's not him? And Ronna said all of the Republican candidates for president will be taking a loyalty pledge to support whomever the nominee is. And that's where that stands. President Biden's student loan forgiveness program, which is unconstitutional in my view, will be argued before the Supreme Court this week. The CIA director was quoted on Face the Nation yesterday. Vladimir Putin is too confident that he can grind down Ukraine. Paranoid psychopaths usually are a bit overconfident. War in Ukraine has changed Europe for good, according to the New York Times. No event has transformed the continent more profoundly since the end of the Cold War, and there is no going back now. This is a very long read into how Finland and Sweden are sweeping into NATO. Poland is becoming the forward operating base of the West against Russia and against China, it turns out, and that's a very good thing. Russia stares into the population abyss as Putin sends its young men to die, reports the Telegraph of Great Britain. The demographics in Russia were not great, and that's before they chewed up 100,000 young men in Ukraine and counting, and up to 500,000 younger men fled the country because they don't want to be conscripted. They're going to reel backwards. They're destroying their country because Putin is a paranoid psychopath. How one Republican senator wants to hold his party together on Ukraine is an opinion column by Jason Willick in the Washington Post over the weekend. It's about Senator Tom Cotton. I recommend it to you. I tweeted it out yesterday. If you're not following me on Twitter, I wish you would. That's where you should get your news from because I curate it for you. And I'll be talking about that and about Ronna McDaniel on the Grand Old Pod today. Only available if you are a subscriber to the Universe. And the Grand Old Pod is where I go to tell you all the news about Republicans, for Republicans, by Republican. That's me. And so if you're not yet a subscriber to the Grand Old Pod, we are starting hard and heavy into presidential coverage now because the race is underway with Nikki Haley in, Tim Scott in Iowa, President Trump in, and of course Vivek Ramaswamy from Ohio, investor extraordinary that you see on Fox Business extraordinary, St. X's grad from Ohio. He'll be joining me later in the program, but we'll be doing that in the Grand Old Pod. Iowa Republicans are open to names other than Donald or Ron DeSantis. All right, of course they are. We don't know what anyone thinks at this point. It's a year away from yesterday, I believe. East Palestine residents are now coming forward with their ailments. I sound like Mickey Mouse, said one woman. Doctors say I definitely have chemicals in me, but there's no one in town who can run the toxicological test to find out why. This is a man, Wade Lovett, who runs an auto dealership there. He has an extremely high-pitched voice, which had never happened before. Dilbert's Scott Adams has been dropped after a response to what he considered to be racist, but never ever greet what you consider to be racism with sweeping declarations about black Americans being a hate group and that white people should get away from them. I am not surprised that Dilbert has been dropped. That is not the way Americans talk about polling, especially, and he was responding to a poll, and we don't know anything about the poll. I'm not interested in the poll. I know that Scott Dilbert has become increasingly conservative on the inner tubes over the past few years, and now he crossed a line and he's been dropped. Something was badly wrong when Washington realized Russia was actually invading Ukraine. Politico has done an oral history of a number of people who participated in the initial decision set after Vladimir Putin rolled in. They were surprised. It's hard to believe they were surprised. I may talk about that with Mike Pompeo later in the show. Conservatives have a new rallying cry, down with ESG. This is just coming to the attention of the Wall Street Journal. It's not like we didn't say this for a long time. In fact, we have a great sponsor of this show, consumersreport.org. Am I right about that, Adam? Consumersresearch.org. I haven't woken up yet. The coffee hasn't kicked in. Consumersresearch.org has been following the ESG story for a long time, and the DEI story, and all the names are there. All the receipts have been kept by consumersresearch.org. I encourage you to go there. And it's great that a Federalist Society veteran is now heading up a multi-million-dollar effort to push anti-ESG messaging, according to the Wall Street Journal. And I'm glad that they're in the game finally. But the Marble Freedom Trust and its consulting firm CRC Advisors are leading this, and Leonard Lito has helped fund them, and I'm glad that they are involved. But consumersresearch.org has the receipts, has been following it for years, and they are 100 years old. So I hope the two groups cooperate to spread the message that ESG is terrible for America and terrible for American corporations and destroys your value as a shareholder. Elon Musk's Twitter cuts more jobs. All right, now, the thing to ask yourself, Twitter works fine for me. I use Twitter every day. I've got a couple 100,000 followers over there, and I use it primarily to push out news stories, links, little clips of things you should see, pointers. I'm your editor on Twitter. Also, make sure you're up to date on the Cleveland Browns, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Guardians, and the Ohio State University Buckeyes, which some of you put up with the politics in order to get the sports, and some of you put up with the sports in order to get the politics, but you get them both. And if I'm reading a particularly good book, like Steve Krakauer's brand new Uncovered, the fabulous book, he'll be on Wednesday, or CJ Box's Stormwatching, he'll be on today, I tweet about that as well. But what's interesting is more than half of the employees are gone and nothing's changed. What does that tell you about old Twitter? That they had lawyered up and layered up with a bunch of woke people who are destroying Twitter. Elon Musk is returning its animal spirits. This from Julie Jargon, why I'm not writing about kids and screen time anymore. That is, in fact, now well known enough to say it's like not smoking cigarettes. You don't let kids have a screen. I mean, very, very rarely. It upsets their emotional development. It stymies them as they get older. It throws them into areas of great concern, particularly vulnerable young adolescents, to hazing, bullying, disparaging things, adult content. You just don't want them on screens. And the writer who's written about that for years has now moved on to other issues because there is no debate. Don't do it. Don't give your kids a cell phone. Don't let them have access to screens. When they do, make sure you're heavily monitored. And by the way, that talks to you a little bit about remote learning as well and why that's a disaster. A basic iPhone feature helps criminals steal your entire data. All right, there are many, many remarkable low-tech tricks out there. And the Wall Street Journal reports yesterday, if you use your cell phone near a cell tower and you use your code, it will be captured. And they will be able to empty whatever is in there. Amazon is expanding same-day delivery with fees while battling slow growth. I'm going to be buying a lot of Amazon this week, I think. And there's a story in the Washington Post today, why music causes memories to flood back. And I just wanted to read this to you. Scientists who study the music's powerful effects on the brain, and I always saw this when I was playing. You could see, the older members of the audience would immediately, they'd know the words, even if they hadn't been to a concert in 30 years. And when I play that again, even when John's not around, it's a remarkable energizer bunny for older people. Scientists who study music's powerful effects on the brain say the growing knowledge could improve therapy for conditions such as dementia, other memory disorders, anxiety, stress, and depression, learning disabilities, and many physical illnesses, such as chronic pain, cancer, and Parkinson's disease. Evidence also exists that music prompts the secretion of brain neurotransmitters such as dopamine. Okay, we all knew this for a long time, right? But it's now scientific. A chemical messenger that plays a role in the brain's reward pleasure system. Other studies have shown that music reduces the stress-producing hormone cortisol, increases the secretion of oxytocin, which plays a role in labor and childbirth, as well as in infant-parental bonding, trust, and romantic attraction. Music activates different parts of the brain, making it an especially versatile tool, says Amy Belfi, assistant professor of psychological science at Missouri University of Science and Technology and principal investigator of the Music Cognition and Aesthetics Lab. I'm surprised they haven't asked me to come down there and just play for them. We can use it to improve mood, to help us learn to socially bond with other people. It becomes part of our identity, like the soundtrack of our lives, which explains why it is so effective in stimulating and retrieving memory. Big long piece in the Post by Marlene Simmons. Nothing that we didn't know. And always is demonstrated for us again when all of a sudden lyrics occur to us from songs we haven't heard for 30 years. And it's not Cecilia, I'm down on my knees, I'm begging you, please, is a lyric that's been in my head for a long time. And it's not the Cecilia lyric. It's a one-hit wonder from the 60s, and we can't find it. Generalissimo suggested it was Elaine, and I don't think it's Elaine, but we caught a bit of it. Or if you had children at one point and you sang to them Rafi songs and you start humming Deep Do Beluga in the Deep Blue Sea, it will come back. There are things that never go away. They're buried in your brain. I'm interested in this to be studied because it's never not been the case that when I've got my bass, stuff happens in the audience. It's just never been the case that other than that has happened. I thought that was fun. Now let's go to the United Airlines fiasco. This is the Hugh rant portion of the program about airlines. Now, everybody who works for airlines, I love you. You got me home on Saturday. I have a particular way of traveling. Only take direct flights so that if you're screwed, you can go back to where you came from. Home or hotel, friend's house, if you're screwed because of weather. I have a second rule. If I had a producer, I would be able to play for you from Snatch what Dennis Farina says when he's asked, have you got anything to declare?
Anything to declare?
Yeah, don't go to England.
All right, so I got something to declare. Don't go to Chicago. All right, that's my declaration. Don't go to Chicago. Any time of the year, period, but especially in January and February. Can we hear that again? Dennis Farina on Snatch being asked as he returns from the United States, does he have anything to declare?
Anything to declare?
Yeah, don't go to England.
Don't go to Chicago. So, the Chicago inbound flight on United arrived an hour late. I travel when I break my rule, and I only break my rule when I have to get somewhere to broadcast. And I broke my rule about non-direct flights because I had obligations on Saturday morning. And so I couldn't go Saturday morning. I had obligations on Friday. Couldn't go at Friday. So I had to fly Saturday afternoon. So the only way to get from D.C. to California, Orange County, is to go to Chicago on Saturday afternoon. And so the flight was supposed to leave at noon, and it left at 2 o'clock. Why did it leave at 2 o'clock? Because the inbound plane from Chicago was delayed, because Chicago's a nightmare, and it's snowing, and it's always a mess, and they've had the winter storm. So it gets there late, and it leaves late because, of course, they forgot to de-ice until it was time to de-ice, and then we had to stop and get out of line. When you get out of line at Reagan National, you don't get back into line. So then we're flying, and, of course, I'm trying to figure out, can I make the connection? I always leave at least 90 minutes, and I prefer 3 hours for a connection because I hate, like Peter Pan, hates, is hated by Captain Hook. And if I had a producer, I could play that for you. I hate Peter Pan. But I did not.
I hate Peter Pan.
So that's what I feel about Chicago and O'Hare. So we landed, and as we approached the gate number, I landed at F1 and had to get to C23. And United has on their app, talk to an agent. In fact, it means talk to a machine. And the machine is not interested in getting to your problem. How are you today? Got a haircut recently? Do you find the chair comfortable? No, all I want to know is, what's my backup plan if this doesn't work? And they said, well, you'll have. It's like, Hal, I'm sorry, Hal. If I had a producer, we'd play that. Because...
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
You see, I'm sorry, Hugh. I'm afraid I can't tell you what there is a backup plan because theoretically you can make it from F1 to C23 in 17 minutes. Theoretically, you can do it. So I type back, but there are 6 of us on this plane. Can you hold the plane for 10 minutes? Maybe 15. I don't know how old those people are. I don't know where they are. I'm traveling solo. So, like Hal, I ask, Can we hold the plane? And I get back Hal's response.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
They can't even answer it. So luckily, all I have is a backpack. I grab the backpack and I run. And then I had a moral dilemma. I hadn't had anything to eat all morning because I was planning on having lunch and that was screwed up. And getting to the airport late, but I wasn't late. I was 2 hours early because I didn't leave for 2 hours. And there's a little kiosk next to the gate. So I have a moral dilemma for you. I look at the kiosk. There's no one attending it. I don't know why people would leave a kiosk next to a gate, but there's no one attending it. And there's about 3 people in line. So I'm thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to eat? I haven't eaten it. There's a box of Cheez-Its, the Universal Food Group, right? Full of proteins and vitamins and everything that you need, the Universal Food Group. Here's my moral dilemma. What does a box of Cheez-Its cost at a kiosk? I don't know, and it's not marked. So I look in my wallet, there's a $10. Now, it's a little box. If you're watching on the Salem News Channel and you see my cell phone, this is about the size of the box of Cheez-Its. So the moral dilemma is, can I take the Cheez-Its without someone at the checkout counter? To which I say yes. They'd rather make the sale than not make the sale. So then the question is, do you put down $10 or $20? I put down 10. $10 for a box of Cheez-Its, which is why I've got to make a significant contribution to Food for the Poor, because I spent $10 for a box of Cheez-Its because I had nothing else to eat and I was running. And I got on the plane. The other 5 people, I have no idea if they made it because I was running at full speed. F1 to C23 is 19 minutes, not 17 minutes. And I got on the plane. All right. So Hal was right. They couldn't help me and I made it. But United, your virtual, I will help you program, because of course, as you land, even though you don't need to buy the wireless to talk to Virtual United, you do have to be able to talk to Virtual United. And as you land, you lose the Wi-Fi on the plane. So after hearing 3 times from Hal the same thing, which if I had a producer,
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Okay, repeatedly. Then I ran, then I did my moral dilemma. I gave my $10, and then I tried to remember it's Lent. Don't be mad at anyone. No one intended for you to sprint, but I thought about the other 5 people. A couple got off right behind me. They were going to Madison, and they passed me in the jetway. I mean, they were sprinting. I said, good luck. And they said, someone's got to take care of the kids, and so I understand that drill too. But just let me declare again, as Dennis Farina had something to declare about going to London. What do you have to declare,
Anything to
Dennis?
declare?
Yeah, don't go to England.
Okay, my declaration, don't go to O'Hare. Don't go. Call up your travel agent and say, no matter where I'm going, whenever I'm going, never take me through O'Hare. This is why you listen to the Hugh Hewitt Show. You want news, the news you need, the analysis you want. You want it all. You get it from me, but you want to make sure, don't go to O'Hare. All right. Dana Bash, Ronna McDaniel yesterday, cut number 26, State of the Union.
Anybody getting on the Republican National Committee debate stage should be able to say, I will support the will of the voters and the eventual nominee of our party.
I want you to listen to what former President Donald Trump said a couple of weeks ago in an interview with conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt on this very topic.
If you're not the nominee, will you support whoever the GOP nominee is?
It would depend. I would give you the same answer I gave in 2016 during the debate. It would have to depend on who the nominee was.
So are you prepared to block the former president?
Well, he
if
signed it in 2016. He did. Everybody signed it in 2016.
But this is about the here and the now. He didn't commit to it.
I think they're all going to sign it. I really do. I think the voters are very intent on winning, and they do not want to see a debate stage of people saying, I'm not going to support this guy. I'm not going to support this guy. What they need to say is, I'm going to do everything I can to defeat Joe Biden. And that means supporting the nominee of the Republican Party.
You can't see a scenario where Donald Trump would just skip the debate if he's forced to sign something saying to support others?
I want to be on the debate stage. I think President Trump would like to be on the debate stage. That's what he likes to do. And I expect they'll all be there.
I do too. Ronna, by the way, I'm going to play more of her interview with Dana yesterday because it's a terrific interview. But I do believe that eventually everyone will support the nominee. President broke some glass when he did that. But I also want to play for you a surprise. Jeb Bush on Fox with Brian Kilmeade, former governor of Florida, cut number 12.
I think is pretty remarkable.
And he hasn't declared yet. Many in the Republican Party hope he soon will. Is this Ron DeSantis' opportunity to run for higher office?
I think it is. He's been a really effective governor. He's young. I think we're on the verge of a generational change in our politics. I kind of hope so. I think it's time for a more forward-leaning, future-oriented conversation in our politics as well, which has made him...
Did you have Jeb Bush endorsing Ron DeSantis on your bingo card this weekend? I didn't. I'll be talking more about that on the Grand Old Pod today. If you're not yet a subscriber to the Universe and you don't like campaign news scattered through over 3 hours, that is where you go. The Grand Old Pod at the Universe, and I'll be doing that after today's show. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live on the West Coast, joined by the former Secretary of State and CIA Director of the United States, Secretary Mike Pompeo. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning, Hugh. Great to be with you.
The first question has to be the story that came out of the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Lab leak, most likely origin of COVID-19 pandemic, Energy Department now says. Your reaction, Mike Pompeo?
Well, I'm glad they got it right after a couple years now. We've known this for a long time. From the very beginning, Senator Cotton and myself made clear this was the most likely case, just the data reflected that. And, you know, like much of the stuff that went on during the COVID era, it was just people telling stories that they wanted to believe. And the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda actually worked here inside the United States. And the State Department, my team did a lot of work in 2020 and 21 to make clear that this was, in fact, a lab leak. It's almost certain that it came from there. And that has deep ramifications, Hugh, for how we should treat the Chinese Communist Party.
Do you think General Secretary Xi and the CCP intentionally withheld news from the world of the leak or the virus being released because they thought if we have to deal with it, the rest of the world has to deal with it?
100%. I think there were probably multiple reasons for that, but your predicate of your whole question, did the Chinese Communist Party, did Xi Jinping withhold this information from the American people? Information that they probably knew in the fall of 2019. Absolute certainty that they did that. They covered up, they hid, they disappeared journalists, all of this to keep the world from knowing that they had screwed up in their lab.
Now, the question I'm getting at is, did they do it because of strategic necessity? In other words, if they had alerted the world would not suffer to the extent that China would. We would have had time to prepare. Therefore, they were just going to drag everyone down with them.
Hard to know. We do know this. We can speculate about what he was thinking. We know what he did. We know that he locked down Wuhan for travel inside the country and put tens of thousands of people on airplanes to places like Milan, spreading what he knew to be a relatively lethal, highly contagious virus around the world. So if you want to imply intent from actions, it is a very clear line to get to the answer that you have in your question here.
Staying with China for a moment, President Biden and his team are very concerned that China is going to arm Russia in an effort to deplete Russia's arsenal, to resupply Russia's depleted arsenal. Do you think they're going to do that? What do you make of the Biden team efforts to deter them?
It's very clear that the Chinese Communist Party has already provided aid and comfort. This silly throwaway proposed peace deal, the fact that they're now buying energy from Russia, all of these things are already providing Russia with the things they need to continue to kill Ukrainian civilians and hold Europe at risk. So I actually think this is happening today, Hugh, certainly on President Biden's watch. I'm glad that they are telling the Chinese back off. I'm glad that they're talking about some intelligence that it appears that they may have about this. I'm happy to, if they have it, they should show the world what the Chinese Communist Party is up to the extent they can. We should make clear that there will be real costs for China and for the Communist Party itself if they continue to support Vladimir Putin in his effort to take down the political leadership in Ukraine and, in fact, take off another slice of Europe on President Biden's watch.
Has the course of the war in Ukraine, Mr. Secretary, in your view, changed China's lean into Taiwan or the threat that they pose to Taiwan? Has it made it greater or lesser?
Difficult to know. All will depend on how it ends. It will depend on can the United States continue to lead an effort to make clear that it is unacceptable to invade another sovereign nation, that the use of military force to take territory is unacceptable. So I think the jury's still out. I am sure, Hugh, that Xi Jinping has watched how hard this is. He can see how difficult it is. I am confident he was surprised at both how hard it was and, frankly, how good a job that President Biden and his team have done of keeping Europe in the game in the face of economic difficulty. But this is far from over in Ukraine. And the way that this ends, I think, will be the decisive data point in Xi Jinping's mind as he thinks about how to achieve his ultimate goal of what he calls reuniting Taiwan with China.
Mr. Secretary, on Saturday, Jason Willick, who's an opinion columnist for the Washington Post, put out a column how one Republican senator wants to hold his party together on Ukraine. And it's your friend, Senator Cotton. It posits he wants everyone to support lethal aid in as much as Zelensky needs to keep Russia at bay and drive them back. What's your position, Mr. Secretary?
Unsurprisingly, Senator Cotton, I think about this the same way. We know there are certainly important ramifications inside of Ukraine, but the whole world is watching to see how America responds. We should stay at this. We should make sure the equipment gets to where it's going. We should make sure that they get the training that they need. But the mistake to date, Hugh, has been that we have been way too slow, way too concerned about provoking Vladimir Putin. Had we done this well, had we done this back in September and October of the year before the invasion, we might well have an end of this war today. Instead, we've piecemealed it out. It feels kind of like the way we piecemealed equipment into Vietnam to me, just slow and tenuous and scared, and a recipe for a stalemate that will end in success for the party that we don't want to win. We have to make sure that the West stays together to make sure that folks like Vladimir Putin, these authoritarian regimes, don't believe that they can roll the United States of America.
Now, a number of prominent Republicans, from your former boss, President Trump, to the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, have issued statements that threw a little shade on arming Ukraine. I don't know how to read them. They're not so specific. Certainly blank checks are in nobody's best interest, as Governor DeSantis said. How do you frame Mike Pompeo's view of weaponry that the United States should be sending, and how much and when?
Faster, more, and weapons that make a difference to the achievement of the ultimate objective. Look, our goal is the same as everyone's. We want this to end as quickly as possible, but this has to end in a way that Vladimir Putin is not rewarded for his aggression. So we should have provided more weapons more quickly, more training too. We always think about the tools, make sure we include all the stuff we do, the intelligence sharing, the capacity to actually do precision targeting at range. Those are the things that America does the best. They haven't asked for our kids, Hugh. And the Biden administration's slowness, right? Its fear of provoking Vladimir Putin has caused this war to go on just as long as it has.
Now, we move from weapon system to weapon system as opposed to strategic objective. We talk about HIMARS, we talk about F-16s, I bring up A-10s. Are we doing the discussion the wrong way?
In what sense, Hugh? Yeah, the answer should be what are the weapon systems that will actually deliver a decisive outcome in the conflict and end the damn thing?
And so do you think F-16s are part of that equation? Do you think A-10s are?
My guess is that they both probably are part of the equation. Complicated logistics tale. So I will leave to the professionals on the ground who can see what's needed against the attacks that Russia continues to make even to this day. But we should make sure we provide those in a way that delivers the outcome that matters, not just to the Ukrainian people, not just to the Europeans, but to the United States. Every citizen can see how this is impacting us here at home, and we should bring this to a conclusion quickly. And we have, along with our European friends who should do more too, we have the ability to do that.
Now, you were stationed in Germany when you were a young soldier, and Germany has
long time ago, Hugh.
Yeah, but you know that the leaders of that era, whether you're too young for Adenauer and you're too old for Angela Merkel, but in between, they had some pretty good leaders, both of the left and the right. What do you make of Germany's to and froing, their double-mindedness? They're almost schizophrenia on Ukraine.
Yes, where's Chancellor Kohl when you need him?
Yes.
Yes, and Reagan and Thatcher as well. And Pope John Paul II, the list of figures who led in moment not too terribly different from this one. Right? This is really, in the end, this is about the Chinese Communist Party. This conflict today on the ground is important, but it is Xi Jinping that threatens the United States of America and our way of life. The Germans, when I was a young soldier, should have done more. We pressed them during my 4 years as Secretary of State. We told them, boy, if you continue to rely on Russian energy, that will end badly. And while we probably couldn't have predicted this, we knew there was always a risk, and now they are suffering from that risk greatly here.
Last question on the CBS Face the Nation yesterday. One of the guests announced that Tehran is just a hair's breadth away from becoming a nuclear power with ICBMs. I think Iran is a vassal state of China. I think Russia is a vassal state of China. That's my strategic lens. Am I right or am I wrong?
You're quite correct. I view it that way. I've spoken about it exactly in that way. Vassal state is probably a modest overstatement, but let's not finesse it. There's no doubt that Iran feels emboldened when the Chinese Communist Party buys their energy and underwrites what it is they are doing. The risk that Iran does, in fact, cross that nuclear threshold or gets close enough that they are considered a threshold nation is enormous to the people of America. Don't think for a moment they will be the last Middle Eastern country that presses for nuclear weaponry. If Iran, the world's largest state sponsor of terror, gets that tool, it puts Israel in a very difficult position at a time we have an administration here in America that is not full-throatedly in support of them. And second, our Middle Eastern friends in the Gulf Arab states are watching this closely too. We need to go back to what we did. We confronted Iran. We made the regime's life difficult, and we reduced the risk to the United States from the threat from there and them as a tool for the Chinese Communist Party.
One political question, Mr. Secretary. I know you haven't declared yet in whether or not you're going to seek the presidency, but if you do and you don't win, will you support the nominee of the party, as has been much discussed this weekend?
Yes.
Mike Pompeo, always a pleasure, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for joining me early on a Monday morning in a week filled with... You're always welcome to come back, Mr. Secretary. Welcome back, America. As you know, in every presidential election, this is Switzerland for Republicans. They are all welcome here. They all get asked the same question, and I'm glad to welcome for the first time Vivek Ramaswamy from Ohio, a great, brilliant financier, but he's from Cincinnati. So we begin there. Vivek, welcome. It's good to have you on the program.
Good to be on. How are you?
I am great. First of all, are you a Bengals fan or a Browns fan?
Big Bengals fan. Very difficult ending it to the season, last two seasons in a row, but I'm a Bengals
Well, that
fan.
may end our relationship right there, Vivek. I hate the Bengals. But give us a little bio, would you, before I launch into my questions. Tell people who have not met you, have not seen you on Fox News or Fox Business or read your things on ESG and DEI. Tell us about Vivek.
Yeah, sure. It's Vivek, no big deal, but Vivek like cake, Ramaswamy is my name, and I was born and raised in Cincinnati, as I said. My parents were immigrants from India. They came over in the late 70s and early 80s. I ended up going to a public schools through 8th grade, private high school, St. X in Cincinnati, and then went to Harvard for college. Thought I was going to be a scientist. I was sort of a nerdy science guy for much of my education. Ended up getting into the world of biotech investing, had a successful career in that realm from 2007 to 2014. And then I started a biotech company that I led as CEO from 2014 to 2021, worked on a range of medicines. 5 of them are FDA-approved products today, from diseases from a rare genetic disease in children to prostate cancer. That's probably the one I'm most proud of. I ended up stepping down as a CEO, though, to focus on a cultural cancer that was the one that threatened, I believe, Martin Luther King's dream and threatened the dream that allowed me to achieve everything I had in my life, which was this new secular religion in America that said your identity was based on your race and your sexuality. And I thought that was going to be dividing us to a breaking point, especially when it infiltrated corporate America and other spheres of our lives. So I stepped down from my job as a CEO. I wrote Woke Inc., and then I wrote another book called Nation of Victims. And I traveled the country speaking out about the risks of corporate power and state power combining to enforce this new orthodoxy. And, you know, as successful as I had been traveling the country, publishing books and op-eds and speaking, and I also did start another company called Strive to compete against BlackRock to offer an alternative view to the ESG orthodoxy in capital markets, I decided that the real problem was a missing national identity in America. And I think we're in the middle of this national identity crisis. I think there's a vacuum at the heart of the American soul. We can't answer the question of what it even means to be an American today. And that's what ultimately led me to take this most recent step to pursue the presidency.
Vivek, my friend Jack Butler, also a St. X grad, is the online editor at National Review. So I solicited some questions from him since he's a St. X guy. His first one is very good. Why is running for president more important than the work you were doing?
I don't know that it is more important. I actually think that this is a multi-front battle. I just think that the question at the heart of our nation right now is what it means to be American. And we lack a good answer to that question. And I think that we're looking for somebody who can revive the ideals that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. Basic ideas like merit, free speech, and open debate as our mechanism for settling political questions, rising to the occasion to step up to communist China, which I don't see enough vision on how we actually do it. And you know what? I think I'm going to be, this is not somebody else's vision that I'm channeling. This is a vision that I have personally developed. I have written 3 books on it. 2 of them are out. I've traveled the country. And I see that as a missing gap in the conservative movement, in the GOP, really in the pro-American movement. And so I don't think that that makes pursuing the presidency more important than solving higher education through offering alternative universities or through doing what I was doing in the private sector by competing with BlackRock and others with Strive. But for me, it's an all-of-the-above approach. And right now, this is the most important way to solve all of those problems by going upstream of wokeness, of transgenderism, of climatism, and go to the root cause, which is really this identity crisis at the heart of the American nation.
Do you expect this to be a domestic election or an election about national security? And by that, I mean the new axis of evil is in Beijing, Tehran, and Moscow, and they dominate this show almost every day. I talked to former Secretary of State Pompeo at the beginning of this hour about those 3 countries. What is this election going to be about?
So I think that right now, our domestic policy and our foreign policy are intertwined. They're 2 sides of the same coin. And I think this election is all about restoring American identity. I'll tell you what that linkage is all about, where right now, we're going to have to take on China, and it's not going to be very easy because unlike the Soviet Union in the last century, we rely on our main enemy for the shoes on our feet and the phones in our pockets. We rely on China for our modern way of life. In fact, that's part of the long-run Chinese plan, was that we can make the United States economically dependent on us to achieve co-equal global status. And they've nearly completed that project from 50 years ago. We can still fix that. I call for a declaration of independence from China. That is the declaration of independence of our century. But that's going to involve some measure of sacrifice. Okay, we've gotten addicted to buying cheap stuff. That's not going to be easy to unwind. However, I think we can make those sacrifices if we know what we are sacrificing for. And that's why it comes back to that question of reviving the idea of what it means to be American in this country.
Let me ask you a couple of quick questions that I ask all presidential candidates. First of all, was Alger Hiss a communist spy?
Say that again?
Was Alger Hiss a communist spy?
I don't know, but good reason to believe
Harvard does not do its job anymore. Which house were you in at Harvard, by the way?
I was in Kirkland House.
Well, no wonder. Okay, no one knows anything from Kirkland House. They all quit and go.
Jocks, you know?
That's it, jocks, and they go off and they find tech companies. Secondly, will you release your tax returns soon?
Of course. I believe in total transparency across the board. Tax, health, whole 9 yards.
What's your net worth, Vivek?
It's been publicly reported at a little over $500 million, and that's in the right zip code.
Okay, that's what I want to know. That's a good zip code to be in. Will you self-fund your campaign?
I will begin by self-funding it. However, I believe in the importance of this being a bottom-up, grassroots-driven campaign. And so, you know what? I don't believe anybody should or could be in a position to buy up a competitive advantage. However, I've had success. I intend to use that to lift this campaign up, but it's going to have to be lifted all the way by a grassroots bottom-up movement.
How do people find your website?
Vivek2024.com.
Do you realize that Vivek is hard for people like, I have audio dyslexia. I mispronounce names all the time. Vivek, I know it rhymes with cake, but Selena had already told me that, and I still butchered it twice already.
That's all right. That's all right.
I know you're going to.
I don't mind it. I have, as best efforts is all I ask. So,
all right. And now let me go back to my list of questions. Vivek 2024 is at Vivek.com.
It's Vivek2024.com. Vivek 2024.com.
Vivek. I'll get it right, Vivek. Have you read The Looming Tower?
I have not.
All right. I recommend it highly. In terms of understanding the Department of Defense, obviously you're a very successful, very smart guy. I mean, just obviously. Can you fix the Department of Defense procurement programs?
Well, I would like to think so. I mean, I think that one of the things that I think is true about a lot of our government agencies, including in our national security establishment, is they've gone so far awry that you can't reform many of those agencies from within. Certain of those agencies we're going to have to shut down and replace with something new to take their place. I'm a guy who's built companies from scratch. I've had success in building companies. I think that at a certain point, and it's part of what Schumpeter calls creative disruption in the sphere of capitalism, I think we need a little creative destruction in the realm of government itself, where certain of those agencies, I will be shutting them down. And you know what? That doesn't mean that those functions don't need to exist. In many cases, they do. We just need to create a new apparatus to take the place of the one that already exists.
Are you familiar with the triad?
The triad.
You don't know what the triad is?
Which context? What
nuclear triad.
What's that?
The nuclear triad.
Oh, the nuclear triad. Yeah, you're talking about our new axis of sort of evil here.
No, I'm talking about the air, the land, and the sea nuclear deterrent that we won the Cold War with.
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, it involves planes, missiles, and submarines, and it was a question that got me into trouble with former President Trump because he didn't know either, and he learned it pretty quickly, and he said he didn't need to know. But it does alarm me a little bit that your life has been in the sciences and in business, but not in defense. And the number one job of the presidency is commander in chief. What do you say to that? How do you get smart on that stuff?
So the number one answer back at you is you're 100% right about that. However, I think that we have gotten so ingrained in habit in how we think about these national security issues that I hope I will bring a fresh perspective. I believe as President Trump did, by the way, back in 2015 and 2016. And I'm a fast study. One of the things we're going to do in this campaign is a lot of my training. We're just going to open source it. We're going to tape it. We're going to put it out as podcasts so that people can understand how I learn.
Well, that's interesting.
So, yeah.
Who is your consultant? Who's your lead strategist?
I hired the strategy group. They're here locally in Columbus. That's Rex Elsass's operation. And Ben Yoho is the CEO of that group. He's the CEO of my campaign.
Do they know anything about national security issues? Because I love Ohio. I'm from Warren. You better get up to Warren because nobody wins unless they go to Warren and figure out something to do for Warren. What's in it for Warren is always my question. But does your team know anything about national security?
They do, and we're building it. And I want to be very open about being humble about this. One of the things I've learned is presidential candidates, they're trained to get a bunch of bullet points behind closed doors, then show up in public and try to pretend like they know everything. I'm the opposite of that.
Good Lord, that's refreshing.
Humility. And people need to learn, and I have a lot to learn. And we're going to allow the nation to watch how I learn. That's actually what matters more than what I know today.
What inputs do you read on a daily basis?
I read the Wall Street Journal, New York Times on editorial pages, both on a daily basis so that I can get both inputs in reverse. And so triangulate on the different views out there. But the two things that I will go every day without reading, will not go a day without reading, are the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times.
Okay, out of left field, but out of right field, comes a question about Israel, the judicial overhaul law. We're talking about them to that. Tony Blinken has been there. Joe Biden's upset with it. Everyone's mad at them. Are you even yet vaguely familiar with what Netanyahu is doing with the judiciary in Israel?
Yeah, I'm watching it. I mean, he's exercising, I think, I would say undue executive power, it would seem. So I think that's a concern, but I don't know enough to say to offer criticism of it.
Okay, good enough. And finally, at St. X's, who is your favorite teacher and why?
Oh, wow, much to choose from. Well, I did like Linda Smith. She was an English teacher I had. Maybe she got an unfair advantage because I had her 2 years. She taught me something useful that stuck with me to this day, which is that if you can't write it down, you don't really know what you think. And I think she was dead right about that. I've now written 3 books. And
Vivek, come back often. I would love to talk more with you at length. And I look forward to that podcast because how you brief a presidential candidate and how a presidential candidate learns in real time is going to be a fascinating podcast. Vivek, 2024, thank you so much. Keep coming back. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned.